What's up, my Canadian cousins? I am so happy that it's the time of year where we actually get to be outside, and so I am filming this outside. I did in September when I started the channel, and I get to be back out here again occasionally. So I'm going to be looking at something today that has been long recommended called the Devil's Brigade. I do have a rough idea of what that is, and I do know that it is I think maybe one of the first special forces brigades that the United States ever had, specifically in World War II, and it was not us alone. It was joint with our Canadian comrades, specifically formed to suit the capabilities of both members of the Canadian Army and certain members of the United States Army, as I understand it. I don't have a lot of details. I know they fought in Italy. I believe in the mountains, but let's see what we can learn. I also saw, in looking for this, that there's actually been a movie about this, and there are a lot of different videos. I think it's a clip from the movie about the Canadians arrive, and I'm going to play that because it seems to be quite popular. I've got one of them's got 10 million views on it, one's got 1 million. So this is certainly something some people seem to be interested in, and it looks like fun. Okay, my friends, please like and subscribe, and I will see you as always on the flip side.
Programmed to create a nuclear weapon, and the Russian front was increasingly looking like a lost cause. Something had to be done, and fast, or the war might soon be lost. That something would be the creation of the US's first Special Forces force. Norway was of great strategic importance to Germany as it gave them access to iron and other minerals needed for the war effort, but also to heavy water facilities, which were used in their nuclear weapons program. Further, their control of Norway prevented the Allies from having an easy year-round route to Russia, which the United States was steadily feeding as many military supplies and food as it could fit into cargo ships. Without this aid, Russia would collapse under the Nazi onslaught. If the Allies could take Norway, it would...
And the Allies tried to take Norway very early in the war, the British in particular, and it did not work out. Unfortunately, and Norway was under British occupation for much of the war, and very different than World War I, where the Allies and the British Navy specifically was able to blockade the Germans into their own ports, whereas holding Norway made that impossible. And that was a very different strategic placement that the British Navy was in World War I versus World War II. Couldn't starve Germany out in the same way.
Open up a direct route to Russia and severely hamper the Nazi war effort. But Norway was easily fortified, and a major assault would be disastrous. Instead, an English intellectual proposed a bold idea: land a small but highly trained and well-equipped force onto the mountain glaciers of Norway, from which they could conduct raids on vital German targets and then retreat back to the safety of their mountain bases. The British High Command thought highly of the idea, but ultimately realized it didn't have the manpower or logistics to pull off such a daring feat. So instead, they kicked the idea over to the Americans. For the Americans, forcing the Nazis out of Norway could spell the end of the European War, something they wanted very much as it would free up the Allies to fight in the Pacific. Plans to land an elite commando force behind enemy lines, which would live off the mountains, were quickly adopted, and the first Special Service Force was born. Recruitment for the FSSF was undertaken via posters at various military bases. The advertisements asked for daring individuals in good physical shape who had experience as mountaineers, skiers, hunters, game wardens, lumberjacks, and the sort. The U.S. wouldn't undertake the effort.
Yeah, so all the cold weather mountaineering, I suppose, was suitable to Canadians and Americans living in the northern regions of the country where it got cold, where there were a lot of mountains. So there's a British idea, kicked it over to us on this side of the Atlantic, and we cooperated on it. I'm using this infographics video. First of all, they're very good. I do sometimes prefer to see things that are not in cartoon. There are a lot of things on this topic that are just too long for a video, for reaction video. We would be here for a very long time. But notwithstanding the cartoonishness of the infographics programs, they're actually their content is very good.
alone, though, and the unit would end up being made up of half Americans and half Canadians. The FSSF would consist of 3 regiments and 1 services battalion, with half the officers and 1/3 of the enlisted men being Canadian. While remaining members of the Canadian military, all expenses were paid for by the U.S. Army, and the men would wear American uniforms. An American officer was placed in charge.
So, I mean, that's interesting. Half the officers were Canadian and 1/3 of the men were Canadian, the enlisted men were Canadian. And when you think about the populations of the two countries, Canadians were overrepresented per capita in this group. And I don't mean that in a bad way, I just mean on sheer statistical numbers.
To the unit, but a Canadian officer was made second in command. The FSSF training was brutal, even by modern standards. Within 48 hours of arrival at Helena, Montana, chosen for its difficult terrain and cold weather, FSSF recruits would earn their parachutist wings. The men spent nearly a full year in training, with August through October dedicated to parachuting, weapons and demolitions usage, small unit tactics, and physical training. October to November was spent on unit tactics and problem solving. November to July consisted of skiing, rock climbing, adaptation to cold climates, and the operation of this specially constructed all-terrain vehicle, the M29 Weasel. Training consisted of not just American and Canadian equipment and tactics, but also the use of German equipment until the men were as proficient with German weapons as they were with their own. They were trained in hand-to-hand combat and bayonet fighting techniques, even sparring against each other with unsheathed bayonets, leading to many injuries. Once the snows fell, Norwegian ski instructors took over, and within 2 weeks, the Americans and Canadians had mastered the basics. The training would...
The Norwegians are very famous for, the skiing aspect of their army. I think that's actually where the biathlon sport comes from, where it's cross-country skiing and shooting.
Until their Norwegian instructors were confident the men were up to Norwegian Army standards. It was an irregular unit, which would soon be fighting in highly irregular ways. The FSSF's first combat deployment would be to the Aleutian Islands in 1943. Their wintertime and mountain training made them perfect for the Alaskan environment, but upon reaching their destination, it was discovered the Japanese had already evacuated the island. The FSSF was then redeployed to Europe, where the possibility of an insurgent into Norway had come and gone. Instead, the men would ship off to Italy and join in the stab at Hitler's soft underbelly. Here, they would have their baptism by fire, trying to take an objective many Allied troops had lost their lives trying to take. Immediately upon arrival, the FSSF had their mountaineering skills put to the test. The Allied push into Italy was being severely hampered by 2 strong German defense positions, one at Monte la Defensa and another at Monte la Remetanea. Previous assaults on these strongholds had yielded nothing but terrible losses for the Allies. The FSSF would have to prove they could succeed where everyone else had failed. If they didn't, the Allied push to Rome would falter. La Defensa would be the first target to be attacked. On the 2nd of December, the 2nd Regiment was tucked into within 6 miles of the base of the mountain, after which the men disembarked and moved on foot through the forest. Ahead of them lay a 6-hour march, uphill, through difficult terrain, with a hornet's nest full of Nazis waiting for them. A force of 600 men had reached the base of the mountain and took a rest. Then, under the cover of dusk, began their ascent of La Defensa. The assault was covered by a brutal Allied bombardment, with one soldier remarking that it looked as if they were marching into hell, as if the entire mountain was on fire. The men managed to sneak all the way to the base of the final cliff they'd have to climb without the Germans ever realizing they were there. Such was the intensity of the incoming artillery. But Mother Nature helped too, lashing out at all the combatants with freezing rain, which helped cover the approaching soldiers.
I mean, because it's cartoon, it doesn't show, the brutality of it. I'm not looking at this and feeling the cold like I would normally. I also just wanted to pause to comment that I love their brigade patch or unit patch, whatever you would call it. It says it's an arrowhead, which is very fitting for both of our countries for it to be an arrowhead. It symbolizes. I assume that they chose that because of the. We both have the First Nations Native American symbolism, and you've got USA written horizontally on the top and Canada vertically down the middle. It's really cool. I like that.
Climbed a 1,000-foot cliff, but
I think I'm going to order one of those If I could find like a replica somewhere, I'm gonna order one of those.
It also exhausted the men and threatened to blow them off their perilous holds into a very ugly death on the rocks below. Incredibly, the men climbed to the top of the cliff and then moved into position in a shallow depression just across from the enemy's lines. They were supposed to hold their fire until dawn, when the assault would begin, but the loose gravel giving way under the feet of the soldiers gave their positions away to the Germans. Flares shot into the air, revealing to the utter shock of the defending Germans the 600 Americans and Canadians that had scaled a cliff to reach them. The FSSF put up a fierce battle, and despite Allied commanders expecting that the fighting would last for up to a week, the Germans retreated to their second defensive position in only 2 hours. Such was the ferocity of the Devil's Brigade attack. Through terrain so treacherous, no regular infantry unit could have managed the feat. The follow-on attack at Monte la Rimatanea had to be briefly halted due to the death of the 1st Battalion Co-Lieutenant Colonel T.C. McWilliam. Instead, the men were ordered to wait for resupply and dug in, expecting
T.C. McWilliam, was he American or Canadian?
German counterattack at any time. The Germans, however, would be unable to mount a counterattack due to the fierce pounding they received from Allied artillery. The flooding of 2 nearby rivers also prevented them from regrouping during their retreat, leaving the Nazis off balance and allowing British forces to break through German lines at Monte Cammino. With the British breakthrough, the FSSF continued to attack on La Rimatanea, taking 3 days to seize their objective. The next month, the FSSF would continue
Okay, so I thought that this was related to Monte Camino. I didn't say it because I wasn't sure if I was right and I didn't want to be wrong. I don't know why. It doesn't usually stop me when I comment on this channel, but that's okay.
Facing its mountain fighting expertise,
I feel better.
By taking several more Nazi positions. They'd be pulled out of the mountains to join a new Allied beachhead at Anzio, which sought to flank the German line, but they paid dearly for their time in the Italian mountains, with a whopping 77% casualty rate. 91 men lay dead, 9 were missing, 313 were wounded, and 116 had to be hospitalized for exhaustion. After a brief recovery and replenishment period, the FSSF replaced the 1st and 3rd Ranger Battalions at Anzio, which had suffered heavy casualties as well. Their job was to hold the line while also launching raids into enemy territory in order to keep the Germans off balance. This is where the FSSF would earn their nickname of the Black Devils, for their propensity to launch daring night raids with completely blacked out faces. The night raids undertaken by the FSSF were so aggressive, in fact, the Germans were forced to retreat a full half-mile from their original position in order to avoid their patrols. But the very presence of the FSSF in the area led the Germans to reinforce their positions with more men than were necessary, tying down German forces desperately needed to counter Allied attacks elsewhere. The Black Devils had earned a reputation amongst the Germans, who believed they were facing a full-on division rather than 3 under-strength regiment. One note found on a German prisoner warned that they would be fighting an entire Canadian-American force. They're treacherous, unmerciful, and clever. You cannot afford to relax. The first soldier or groups of soldiers capturing one of these men will be given a 10-day furlough. With their raids penetrating deep behind enemy lines, the Germans grew increasingly
treacherous, merciless, and clever. I mean, they truly were, very early special forces. They were. Wow. That casualty rate, though. Oh, God, that's terrible. So, what was it, 75%?
More fearful of these Canadian and American Night Devils. To further wreak havoc on German morale, the FSSF began to leave a unique calling card on the corpses of Germans killed and equipment destroyed in the middle of the night, a sticker with the unit's patch which read in German, "The worst is yet to come." That summer, the FSSF would have the honor of being one of the first Allied units to enter an enemy capital as they rushed into Rome under the cover of night in order to ensure that the retreating Germans didn't blow up key bridges. With Italy falling to the Allies, the FSSF would be shipped to the sunny southern coast of France, but they weren't there for a vacation. With the successful Allied landings at Normandy, the FSSF would help envelop German forces in France in a pincer movement. But first, the Axis had to be kicked out of the Mediterranean for good. This would require the taking of several key islands along the southern French coast, eliminating German airfields and naval facilities. Here, the FSSF would prove they could not just fight in mountains or invade from the sea, but bring victory from the sky as well, as they were airdropped into the island of Pokru. The Nazis had fortified the strategically important island with 5 forts, but their naval support was quickly eliminated by a single American destroyer as it surprised 2 German ships defending the island. After sinking both, the USS Somers turned its attention to providing fire support for the the airborne assault on the island's forts. In just one single day of fighting, the FSSF captured 3 of the 5 forts, with the other 2 surrendering without resistance. They suffered only 9 dead for their efforts. Soon, the FSSF was joining in the invasion of southern Italy, where it fought several tough-won skirmishes against the German occupiers. As the war swung against Germany, the FSSF was moved for a well-earned rest along the French and German border to act as a blocking force and deterrent against a German breakout as the Allies pushed into Germany itself. On the 5th of December 1944, the FSSF was officially disbanded. There were no more need for its specific expertise, and both the Canadian and American military would be better served by having the men move to other units within their respective militaries. On the day of disbandment, the American troops honored their Canadian brethren with a pass and review. Eyes right, officers salute. The FSSF would be direct descendants of the U.S. Army Special Forces and laid the groundwork for training, doctrine, and tactics employed by American Special Forces to this day. Every 5th of December, American and Canadian Special Forces still celebrate December 5th, along with surviving members of the FSSF. Now, go watch Hitler's Secret Weapon, Germany.
Oh, wow. I love that. I love that to this day they celebrate it. And gosh, I wonder how many, if any, of the original are still surviving. You know, it's understandable that eventually this was a massive war and we had to work together in an unprecedented way. I do love that we were able, that we did, and that is a tie and a memory of our being allies and friends in that war that will always live on and in people's memories, and you know, so long as people learn about this. You know. Anyway, my friends, let's move on to the fun part of this, which is from the movie The Devil's Brigade, and watching the Canadian Corps march in, I guess, to the training camp for the first time.
All right, big mouth, that did it.
Wait a minute, it was all my fault.
Butt out! On your feet, Dago.
Okay, the loudmouth, obnoxious Americans just sitting around waiting for the Canadians to come, I suppose. Is that what's happening? Yes, and here comes the Canadians. I love pipe and drum bands. I love them. I suppose this is showing the contrast between the unruly rabble that are the Americans and the very professional Canadian military forces, which is not untrue about the professionals in the Canadian forces.
Change direction, right! Right wheel!
So I wonder if the soldiers here in the front wearing the kilts are from one of the Highlanders divisions. Isn't that traditional for them?
Mark time in front. Move it up. Ready, company. Hope. Left.
Major Crown, sir. Canadian Army. Reported for duty.
Glad to have you with us, Crown.
Steady, coming in. Steady. Hey!
Captain Cardwell, get these men into formation. On the double.
Sergeant, company formation on the double.
Company formation over here and on the double. Let's go.
You're embarrassing us, man. Get those shirts buttoned up.
Move it. On the double.
Steady. Hey!
God save the king.
God save us all.
All right. Well, that was a movie. I wonder how accurate to life that was, but quite amusing. And that marching is impressive. I'll always love that. Like I said, the pipe and drum bands. I love watching the fire departments and the police departments do it here. It's gorgeous. Okay, my friends. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly learned quite a bit, and I love that patch, as I said before, and I think I'm going to try to order one. I would never, deem to wear it because I didn't earn it, but I will display it somewhere in pride for that American and Canadian unit that ultimately was the precursor to our special forces. Yours too as well, probably. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you soon, my friends. Take care.